There's a poem called Footsteps in the Sand, and it talks about a person having a real rocky life. And he's following the footsteps in the sand. And at one point, there are two sets of footprints. And at another point, there's only one set of footprints. And he asked God why at one point in his life there was only one set of footprints. And God says, well, those were the times that I was carrying you. You weren't able to walk on your own, so I carried you. And when I read that poem for the first time, I looked back on my life and I thought, wow, that's exactly what happened to me.
The extraordinary story of Peggy Bearden makes it clear that the power of love can overcome even the most horrific childhood. In order to tell this story, we must include some graphic details that are not suitable for children. We don't tell the story because of how it begins, but because of how it ends. This is a story of radical transformation. Hillary Carr reports.
Peggy Bearden grew up during the Depression in a house much like this one in the small lumber town of Springville, California. One of her earliest memories was the sound of singing coming from the church next door.
They were singing Jesus Loves Me and Amazing Grace. And I always wondered who this man was that they called Jesus. And I was also always asking the people, is your name Jesus? And they would look and they would say, why no, why? Well, I'm looking for that man that I hear them sing about named Jesus. Which one is Jesus?
Peggy didn't have a lot of time to wonder about the church next door. Finding enough food to eat was the primary concern. While other kids were learning their ABCs, Peggy and her 5 younger siblings were learning to steal enough food to survive. And it didn't much matter who or what they stole it from.
I learned to steal early in life as a way of feeding my siblings. I stole from the local markets. Later, I stole from people's hen houses. I stole their eggs and their chickens. I soon found out that the chickens were far too noisy, so I started stealing the rabbits. They were easier to steal.
We had no running water, no electricity, very few clothes, never enough to eat. And it is true that I looked down on Peggy Bearden, and for me to look down on Peggy when I was so very poor myself and so very needy myself did mean that she was a very, I hate to use the word pitiful, but a very pitiful child.
And I remember Peggy always standing back, never mingling with the other kids, just standing back, thin, dirty, 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 dirty. And the kids would make fun of her and she'd fight.
At school, I was always in trouble, and the teachers locked me in the cloakroom. And I loved being locked in the cloakroom because that's the only place I could eat. And I would eat everybody's lunches. First, I would go through and eat what I liked the best. And if I were still hungry, I'd go and like what I liked next to the best.
I can remember that she wouldn't take, my whole lunch would never be gone, but bits and pieces of my lunch would be gone. And I can remember that, but I never knew until later she was the one that was doing it. But I, yes, do know that my lunch had been taken many times, many times.
Eventually, I learned that I wasn't supposed to eat the lunches, and I would try real hard to not eat those lunches. I would even knock on the door telling the teacher she must let me out because I wanted to eat the lunches, and she would just leave me in there. I never could understand why it was okay for them to eat and not for me.
Peggy's father, Melvin, was repeatedly hospitalized for tuberculosis. Peggy's mother, Winnie, had 6 children and limited options to support them.
In those days, if there was a man in the home, you could not get welfare. And I know that my mother did not have welfare. So as a way of support for herself and the children, she was prostituting. I saw her on many occasions. My father, when he found out about it, was just up in arms over it, and he would walk away from the hospital to come home and be with her. And through the process of him sitting in the bars, waiting for my mother, drinking and gambling, he became addicted to drinking and gambling, and waiting for her to come home from wherever she was. Early every morning, our house came alive with screaming sounds from my mother. But this one particular night, the screams were just different for some reason. So I got out of bed and I just followed her screams, and I stood at the door. There was a light on, and I watched my mother in the bed in excruciating pain. She was alone. My dad was back in the hospital. She was alone, and she was on her hands and knees, hanging on to the foot of the iron bed.
Peggy watched her mother as she gave birth. She watched her mother take the baby into the kitchen. She watched her mother wrap the baby in paper and run water into the sink. Then her mother turned and noticed Peggy.
And she stopped and called me into the kitchen and said, "How long have you been watching?" And I said, "I've been watching for a long, long time. Your cries awakened me." Anyway, by this time, the baby was dead. A few days later, she came, and it was at night, and she got me out of bed and told me that there was a bundle out by the gate, and she wanted me to take it into the great vineyard and bury it. And I took the baby out into the grape vineyard, and I buried it.
We learned English.
Your kids can too. Just watch Hello Channel.
I remember a time when I wasn't being very nice to one of the girls at school. I didn't think it was a big deal. But in one sentence, my mom helped me understand. She said, "Mija, you need to treat others the way you want to be treated." I thought about that a lot. I still do.
Life's most important lessons are best learned in the home. A message from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I really feel that if God hadn't have been with me, that my dad would have killed each and every one of us kids right before our mother's eyes, all 6 of us, and then killed her, and then perhaps killed himself.
The transformation of a life can begin in a moment, but then take years to fully reveal itself. In Peggy Bearden's case, things had to get a lot worse before they started to get better.
For 11 years, Peggy watched her father beat her mother. One night, Peggy defended her mother by firmly punching her father in the face. They fought and she held her own, embarrassing him in front of his sons. Days later, he gave her the first gift he had ever given her.
My dad called me in one afternoon and he said, "Come here, sissy, I have a present for you." My dad never had a present for me. My dad never had a present for anybody. We just didn't have presents. But he had a present for me and I was very excited. And he held up this jacket and he said, "It's a coat." "Oh, that's wonderful, a coat. I've never had a coat." And I heard my mother in the background go, "Oh, Melvin, please." And I thought, something clicked, but I just went right straight for that jacket and he was holding it up. He said, "Here, sissy, put your arms in it." And I just put my arms in it and all of a sudden he just threw me around. I just went spinning and I was just locked in this thing. And he buckled me up and tied me up and he drug me to the backyard and hung me in a tree, a fig tree. Hung me in the tree. My legs couldn't even touch the ground and I was there for about 3 days. My dog Patches came and got under my feet to give me support, but my dad came out every day and beat me with an old piece of a hose. He beat my legs.
The straitjacket hung in the tree for years. Nobody ever bothered to take it down. It was a constant reminder to Peggy of the terror that lived in that house, a terror that kept coming back in increasingly familiar ways. One night, Peggy again watched her mother run water into the kitchen sink.
One night, my mother found me standing at the kitchen door again, watching her. And she came over and got me and brought me into the kitchen, and she explained to me what was going on, that she wasn't able to feed the children that she had. She didn't know what else she could do. She didn't have any other choice, so she was going to show me how to do this. And the kitchen sink was already filled with water, and there was this little bundle in the kitchen sink wrapped in paper, and she wanted me to hold it under the water, and I'm just a child, so I started kind of playing in the water, and the paper started washing off. And pretty soon, before I knew it, I saw a couple little pink legs sticking out and a bunch of little toes, and they started moving, and before you knew it, I could see that I had a little sister. I'd never had a sister. I had 3 mean brothers that I had to fight with, and I had wanted a sister so badly, and I took that baby out of that water, and I grabbed her, and I ran out that door, screaming, she's mine, you can't have her, we're not gonna kill her, she's my baby, and I'll keep her. And I took the baby and carried her all over town with me.
Peggy showed the baby to all of the neighbors so they would see it, and so her mother couldn't drown it. She raised the baby, caring for her until they were sent to different foster homes and forced apart. Peggy didn't see her sister again for another 10 years. At the age of 17, the courts returned Peggy to her mother. A few months later, she married the man next door.
I was so excited about getting married the first time because I was going to have a mother. For the first time, I was going to have a mother who was going to be there for me, and I just knew that she was going to love me. She had something like 9 children. It was a large family, and I was marrying her youngest son, but she ended up not liking me because I was a thief.
After 3 failed marriages, Peggy began to fight the greatest battle of her life: alcoholism.
I said all my life that I wouldn't do to my children what was done to me. I said I would never become what my parents were. And at the age of about 27 or 28, I fell to the awful disease of alcoholism. And I wasn't just my mother or just my father. I was both of them in one.
By this time, Peggy was up to her 6th husband. She was being arrested daily for drunk driving and afraid of losing her 2 little boys. It was then the first really good thing happened in her life.
So I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd had a friend who'd been able to quit drinking, and I called him to find out how he'd quit, and he sent a couple of women from AA over to talk with me. They carried me around to a couple of meetings for a couple of days until I got my thinking clear. I would take my little boy with me, who was about 5, and a sleeping bag, and he'd sleep while I was in the meetings, and after the meetings, I'd just roll him up and we'd go home. Alcoholics Anonymous was wonderful for me, and it helped me tremendously. But one of the things that happened with me was that I got all my thinking back, and this criminal thinking was so embedded in my mind that it also made me a better criminal.
And a better criminal is what she became. She did what she knew. She followed her mother's footsteps into the oldest profession in the world.
And I became a madam. I was taking a class at Fresno State College, and I heard some girls talking about working for an escort service. So I scooted my chair closer and I started listening to them. And these bells started ringing. My criminal mind just started spinning. The girls made fantastic money. I made fantastic money. I had a wonderful clientele. I had professional people from all over. And I ended with making lots and lots of money.
But in late 1982, Peggy made a big mistake. She put an ad in the Fresno Yellow Pages, and that ad led to her arrest.
I was sentenced to 6 years in prison. I was sent to the California Institution for Women in Fonterra, California, where I did 3 years. I was just terrified the first night they took me into prison.
While in prison, Peggy couldn't get away from the screams of the other inmates. She needed to find peace. And she found it in the one place she was never allowed to go as a child: church.
As a little girl, I couldn't go to church. They wouldn't allow me to go to church. I didn't know what God was. And here I go to prison, and I find that the only place that I can find peace is in the church. So I went to church. I was only in church a couple of times, and they had a black choir, and I loved the jazzy music. We had a black chaplain, and I loved his preaching, and I wanted to join the choir. So I showed up one day for choir practice with all the black girls, and they just had a fit. They didn't want this white face in their choir, and they went to the chaplain and told him that they didn't want me in the choir. But the chaplain liked me, and he talked to them, and before you know it, I was singing in the all-black choir.
Peggy sang in the all-black choir every week. The songs she learned, songs of slavery and freedom, struck a powerful chord with her. One song in particular she grew to love.
Peggy took a long journey from a hellish upbringing to grace. We'll find out just how that amazing grace gave her a new life, and we'll meet the man who became her husband after this.
You can learn English at home. Watch Hello Channel.
I was just terrified the first night they took me into prison. The terrible noises, the awful, awful screams that never stopped.
After Peggy was released from prison, she met and married Jim Hanley. Here you both are. Welcome to The Evidence.
Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And, by the way, how long were you in prison?
I did 3 years.
3 years. You come to the last day. They wish you well.
No, they just opened the gate.
They open the gate, and this man,
No house.
This man suddenly is in the story. I mean, I say suddenly, he's here today.
Right.
How in the world did you meet Jim?
We met through a mutual friend. I'm in AA. Jim's
AA, Alcoholics Anonymous.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
All
Jim's first wife, who had passed away, was a recovering alcoholic, and then we had a mutual recovering alcoholic friend who introduced us.
Now, Jim, are you a recovering alcoholic?
No.
You were married to one, your first wife.
That's right.
So you meet Peggy. Do you know Peggy is an alcoholic when you meet her?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay.
Matter of fact, that was one of my qualifications in finding another mate, that they have a recovery in the program.
That your next life partner would be an alcoholic?
That's right.
A recovering alcoholic.
That's right.
Jim, I'm just intrigued with this. Almost as if you sense it was a life calling to remarry, as you did with Peggy, another recovering alcoholic.
I heard in Al-Anon way early, some lady said, "Boy, I'm grateful that God put an alcoholic in my life." And I thought, boy, that's the craziest thing that anybody could say.
Yeah.
But today, I'll tell you, it is the most wonderful thing God ever did to me.
Because it's done something to you.
Oh, yes.
What's it done?
Well, it has made me not to be a nuisance to other people. See, religion has a kind of a double-edged sword. You can be a religious person and just be a nuisance about it. Or your religion can be effective in changing people's lives. And I believe God needed to change me.
Really, the subplot to your own life story is that through your partnership with recovering alcoholics, transformation not only was happening in their lives, transformation is happening in your life.
Oh, yes.
Almost as if it's God's, you're suggesting God's mission for all lives to experience transformation.
Oh, yes, I think that it's absolutely true. God has a very earnest desire for everyone to find Him.
So, Peggy, was it easy to believe in God originally? You started out, I mean, that just came naturally for you?
Oh, my heavens, no. No.
Well, how'd you come to believe then?
It was very difficult. You know, AA is a spiritual background.
It's true.
And I was told when I first went to AA to fake it till I made it. And I just kept faking it.
Your life story, does it strike you as unfair?
No, not really. For many years I thought it was, but today I think I was given that life. I was given that life to see what I would do with it.
So you don't blame God?
I don't blame God at all, no.
You blame your parents?
No.
Blame your childhood?
No.
No?
Mm-mm. Well, you know, I couldn't recover. I couldn't recover, and I couldn't be a child of God if I had any blame for all those people.
So Peggy, here you are, experiencing transformation now in your life journey. If you could go back and talk to the little Peggy Bearden, what would you say to her?
I would take little Peggy by the hand, and I would say, "Come and go with me." I would love to go back to that little church in that little town.
Would you?
And take that little girl. and really go into that church and go to the altar with that little girl and pray with her. You see, Dwight, I was always looking for God somewhere else. I was looking for him out there. I was looking for him in a man form, because that's who I thought he was. I didn't know that he was a spirit that lived within myself, and I had to find him within my own soul. And today I know that.
Peggy, thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you,
God
Dwight.
bless you both. Jim,
Thank you.
Glad you came. If you want to know more about Peggy's story, you can check her story out on our website, The Evidence, that's one word, theevidence.org, O-R-G. We'll be right back after this.
Learning a new language can be difficult and discouraging, but it doesn't have to be. Hello, I'm Karen, introducing Hello Channel, the revolutionary new channel designed especially to teach English. If you can speak English, the future is open for you, since speaking English means greater opportunity and higher paying jobs. By watching Hello Channel, you are immersed in this valuable language. You'll hear the words being spoken. You'll see the speakers' mouths when they say the words. You'll read what's being spoken in large, clear subtitles. And you'll speak out loud, practicing what you have just learned. There is no better or faster way to learn a language than total immersion. Hello Channel does exactly that. There's programming on every level, so you can watch the shows that are just perfect for you. Whether you've spoken a little English, a great deal of English, or none at all, the Hello Channel has something for everyone. Join us for a convenient, affordable, and fun way to shape your future. There's so much in store for you if you'll just say hello.
Peggy Hanley had the kind of childhood that dooms most people to a life of dysfunction, if not outright criminal behavior. That's what most sociologists would say her environment pointed her toward. And in fact, Peggy did have her run-ins with the law. But something remarkable happened to her in prison. Something happened that helped her, in a sense, to turn her tragic childhood upside down. Where before she was haunted by the utter absence of love, now she felt overwhelmed by it. Peggy points to an encounter with God as a source of her transformation. His love proved constant and genuine and deep. It's this unconditional love that enables her to make very different choices today. She's no longer compelled to play out her life as a victim of the destructive forces of her environment. She's no longer trapped by abuse and neglect. She's found something that gives her the leverage to overturn all that went before. I believe Peggy shows us concrete evidence of just how real God's love is. Her story makes it harder to assume that His compassion and concern are just something people imagine to get them through the night. The horrors of Peggy's childhood weren't something she imagined. The chaos of her life wasn't something she made up. All that was all too real. Even so, God's love had to be just as real in order to move her beyond it. If His love had been any less real, Peggy couldn't have overcome her childhood. She couldn't have turned a vicious cycle of abuse into a positive and productive existence. The ugliest colors and the darkest corners of life in this world sometimes make God's love shine the brightest. That's what I think. I'm Dwight Nelson. Join us next time for more of The Evidence.